Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Terry Wahls, who is an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner and who conducts clinical research using functional medicine principles in the setting of multiple sclerosis. In 2018, she was awarded the Institute for Functional Medicine's Linus Pauling Award for her contributions in research, clinical care, and patient advocacy. Dr. Wahls has secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, which confined her to a tilt recline wheelchair for 4 years. Yet, Dr. Wahls restored her health using a diet and lifestyle program she designed specifically for her brain and now pedals her bike to work each day. She's the author of the Wahls Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles in Functional Medicine, the Wahls Protocol, a radical new way to treat all chronic autoimmune conditions using paleo principles, and the cookbook, the Wahls Protocol, Cooking for Life, the revolutionary modern paleo plan to treat all chronic autoimmune conditions. Welcome to the show again, Dr. Wahls.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
For our listeners, Dr. Wahls is a local guest, also from Iowa, and she's a repeat guest, although it's been, at least 4 years. You were
Yeah,
one of my very first guests. Thankfully, we're brave to come on the show. I think it was summer of 2020 when I launched, and so her first episodes on the show, titled "Food is Medicine," were episodes 3 and 4, and I highly encourage listeners go back to hear her story. But for new listeners, that seems like forever ago. So, can you again share your miraculous story?
Yeah, in retrospect, my symptoms begin during medical school, twinges of discomfort at my temple, and grow progressively worse over the next 20 years. Then I develop weakness in my left leg. I end up seeing the neurologist who starts the workup, and it takes about 3 weeks to get everything done. And I'm actually secretly praying for a fatal diagnosis because I don't want to become disabled. And I hear the words multiple sclerosis. I do my research. I find the very best MS center in the country. I see their best physician. I take the newest drugs. 3 years later, I hear tilt, recline, wheelchair. And then I ask myself, am I really doing all that I can? I go back to reading the basic science, and I decide that mitochondrial dysfunction is what's driving disability. And so I develop a supplement cocktail for my mitochondria, which slows my decline, helps my fatigue a little bit. Very grateful. My chief of staff calls me to his office and says, Terry, I'm assigning you to the traumatic brain injury clinic. You'll go there starting in January. He describes the job. And I know physically I won't be able to do that. So that's pretty upsetting. The following week, I discover a study using electrical stimulation of muscles in people who are paralyzed, who are never going to walk. I convinced my physical therapist to let me have a test session. Hurts really quite bad, but when it's over, I feel great. He says it's probably the endorphins, and we add the electrical stimulation to my little tiny 10-minute workout, because if I do any longer than 10 minutes, I can't function to go to work. Then 2 weeks after that, I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. They have this course on neuroprotection. I take that course. I have a longer list of supplements that I'm taking. Then I have this big aha. What if I redesign the paleo diet that I've already been following for 5 years based on this long list of supplements? So I do some research to figure out where they are in the food supply. And I start this new way of very structured paleo diet, December 26, 2007. Now, for context, at that point, I'm so weak I cannot sit up anymore in a regular chair. I'm in a zero gravity chair with my knees higher than my nose. That's how I staff residence clinic. That's how I take my meals with my family. I'm beginning to have brain fog. That's probably why my chief of staff reassigned me, is going to force me to finally take medical retirement. And my trigeminal neuralgia has been getting progressively more severe, much more difficult to turn off. January comes, I go to this new clinic. The first 2 weeks I get to just watch. The third week of January, so it's the fourth week of this new structured diet, I come home on Monday and I tell Jackie, that really wasn't too bad. And by the way, honey, could I sit in a regular chair for supper? That's sort of a big deal. I haven't done that in years.
Yeah.
So I have supper with my family. And then, I continue in clinic. On Friday, I come home and say, honey, I think I can do this. And when I see my physical therapist says, Terry, you're stronger. Let's go to 10 minutes twice a day for your exercises. Then it's 15 minutes twice a day, then 20 minutes twice a day. And then I start walking with walking sticks at the hospitals, stunning my colleagues, and then with one walking stick, and then with none. And then on Mother's Day, 2008, I really wanted to try riding my bike. And we have this emergency family meeting. Jackie tells my 16-year-old son, Zach, who's 6'5", big guy, you jog alongside on the left. And she tells my 13-year-old daughter to jog on the right, and she'll follow. And I get on my bike and I bike around the block. Of course, that big 16-year-old boy, he's crying, Zebby's crying, Jackie's crying.
Yeah.
And I still cry reliving that moment, because that's when I ask myself, like, how close to normal could I get? And in October, after that, I bike a little more every day. And in October, Jackie signs us up for the Courage Ride, 18.5 miles.
Wow.
And I finished that ride.
She's
and of course,
optimistic.
we're all crying.
I mean,
that's that, that was a big deal. And that fundamentally changes how I think about disease and health. It will change the way I practice medicine, and it will change the focus of my research. And I've made it my mission in life to offer hope to people with progressive severe disease, that yes, there are things you can do. I've also made it my mission to do the research to change the standard of care, so that when people are diagnosed with MS or any serious autoimmune condition, we may say, we've got these FDA-approved drugs to offer you, but just as important are the things that you are doing every day in your self-care routine.
I mean, you literally changed the trajectory of your life.
Absolutely.
What do you think were the biggest needle movers there? I mean, you mentioned the supplements, electrical stimulation, the diet. Like, can you expand maybe on some of those?
Yeah.
What the supplements, and obviously expand on your diet.
So,
too.
Once I was diagnosed, I started reading the literature. It got me so upset because I saw the progressive nature of the illness and how quickly people lost their jobs. And Jackie sat me down and said, honey, you got to stop reading. We'll find the best people. This is just upsetting you. So I did that. And we saw the best people. And then when I was in the wheelchair, like, well, we know how bad it's going to be. It's really terrible. I might as well go back to reading. And then, then I started experimenting on myself. I had already switched to a paleo diet. So I'd been a low-fat vegetarian eater since medical school.
Yeah.
Lots of beans and rice and vegetables. So it was a great diet. It was a diet that people would say very healthy, very heart healthy. But for me, it was not good because it still had wheat. It still had dairy. It still had some eggs.
And if I remember right, that those foods were triggering your trigeminal, losing my voice here, triggering your trigeminal neuralgia, excruciating pain. Yeah.
And of course, I would eventually figure that out, but I had 5 years of a paleo diet, still getting worse. I added supplements when I hit the wheelchair, and it was clear if I stopped my supplements, my fatigue was much, much worse. So the supplements were clearly doing something, and I still take a bunch of supplements, and I feel better taking the supplements. I added the electrical stimulation, and that really did great things for my mood. It was super interesting. Now, the science around electrical stimulation, what it's doing in your brain, is super interesting because it helps release more nerve growth factors. When you exercise, you release nerve growth factors that are really great for your brain. And so the fact that I could exercise more with the electrical stimulation, I had more nerve growth factors in my brain. And I'll still do electrical stimulation about an hour a day. I'm jogging, and I'm strength training. So I don't need electrical stimulation for for rehabilitation. I'd say I'm using it more like an athlete who's strength training, who uses
Sure.
electrical stimulation to grow bigger muscles, because for a speed or a sprint or a bodybuilding contest, electrical stimulation is super helpful for that. We also know from the research that it stimulates more release of nerve growth factors in the brain. And it was very clear, and it drove my colleagues crazy because they knew how many hours a day I was doing electrical stimulation. They said, Terry, there is no safety data on this amount of electrical stimulation. And it's true, there isn't. But it releases all these nerve growth factors. And, I have a progressive neurologic disorder.
If it was helping you, yeah, hard to talk you out of something that was helping you.
I was like, oh my God, I could tell if I was doing the electrical stimulation, it was doing really great things for my mental clarity and my mood. And so periodically I would say, like, okay, well, I'll try to take it back down to the FDA approved amount, which is 45 minutes. And I could tell that my mood and mental clarity was not as good. And I'm like, well, I'm going back up because it's clearly doing something that's very helpful for my brain. Now I've since added vibration therapy as part of my strength training routine.
Yeah.
And when I did that, it's interesting. So that also stimulates nerve growth factors.
Mm-hmm.
When I added the vibration therapy, I could tolerate reducing my electrical stimulation. So
Interesting.
we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. But my theory is, I think this is all tied into. I now that I have done these interventions that are so vigorous for nerve growth factor generation, I can tell.
Yeah, clearly it's working. Yeah.
I can tell. Now, the other thing that is super interesting in my recovery story is when I redesigned my diet, and I had also done food sensitivity testing that summer, and I saw that eggs were a problem. So was it the fact that I took eggs out? Yeah, maybe. Was it the fact that I was much more specific in what to eat? I really ramped up the greens. I added organ meats. I ramped up the fermented foods.
Mhm.
I think more likely it's the accumulation that I did all of this stuff.
Combination of everything. Sure.
That I realized that summer I'm going to be reassigned to a job that I probably can't do. I'm beginning to have brain fog. My future, because secondary progressive MS is a progressive disease, there is no recovery of functions once lost. So I was doing all that to slow my decline, because I knew recovery wasn't possible, Stephanie. I accepted that. And that was part of my medical training. It's what my neurologist had told me for basically 20 years I'd been seeing neurology, that I had a progressive disease. So I took incredibly toxic drugs to try and slow it down. And because my hands still worked, I could still feed myself. I could still wipe my own butt. And those are really valuable things. So I was happy to do some extraordinary stuff in my self-care to try and keep my hands.
Sure. Can you expand on your diet also? And
Yeah.
Obviously, listeners, again, go back, because in the former episodes, we really dove into specifics, on what the Wahls protocol is and the different tiers of that.
Yeah.
And we don't have to, repeat all of that, but just give us kind of the basics of what you created then through what you learned. Yeah.
What is super interesting, and this is what I've done a whole lot of research on this diet. I've been following the paleo diet, which really emphasized no dairy, no legumes, no grain, vegetables, and proteins, but didn't really tell you much about what to eat, just said what to not eat.
Not eat, yeah.
And I've done that very carefully for 5 years. And now my addition is I take out eggs because of the food sensitivity testing. I'm already grain-free, legume-free, dairy-free. But what I learned is I want to be much more precise. So what to add?
Mhm.
green leafy vegetables. So
Lots,
spinach, Swiss
lots.
chard,
Yeah.
kale, collards, and we're talking 3 cups. So that's a plate full of greens. So huge salads, or you could cook your greens lightly. So that's about half your plate. Then deeply colored, things like carrots, beets, berries. So think of cutting the food item is there pigment all the way through, and that'll let you know. Okay, we could
Sure.
count that as color. So pears, bananas, apples, delicious, but they don't count colored, and they're pretty starchy food. So it depends on what your goals are. Do you need
Sure.
to be watching your weight, etc. And then the third category is what I call the sulfur-rich. That is the cabbage family, onion family, mushroom family.
Mhm.
We need the dietary sulfur to make a lot of neurotransmitters, make a lot of our structures, and unfortunately, many of us don't have enough dietary sulfur in our diet. So those are vegetables to add. Then I want to have protein sources: meat, fish, poultry. I do recognize that there are some people who are spiritually committed to being vegetarians, and so then you're going to have beans and legumes and a gluten-free grain such as rice or buckwheat. So I have vegetarian options as well. And I stress the benefits of fermented foods, particularly sauerkraut and kimchi. You can take nut milk and make yogurts and kefirs out of that as
Mhm.
well. And so we do that in addition.
Sure.
And liver once a week. I grew up having liver every Friday night, and boy, if you complained, you got more. So on the farm life, you do not complain about chores. You don't complain about your food, because that just was not an acceptable behavior in our household.
Need those organ meats. Yeah, I remember both of my parents were farmers, and someone ate the gizzard, someone ate the liver. So, I mean, we just passed it around. Someone had to eat
Yep,
that. We
and
weren't going to waste
that
it. Yep, that's for
you weren't
sure.
going to waste it.
Yep.
And you had soups and stews.
Yep.
We bones. You cooked up the bones and made your soups and stews. We also made something called head cheese. So big kettle. You boiled up the whole head, and then you strained it out. And
Hmm.
I think we added oatmeal to it and made this sort of meatloaf kind of things that then you could slice up and would
Yep.
have sandwiches. And actually, that really was incredibly delicious.
Hmm.
Uh, and in retrospect, I don't know if we had the brains in there or not, but I'm guessing probably we did.
Yeah,
We
we probably
scooped
didn't
out the
remove them.
eyeballs, but otherwise it was the whole head, and it was a really very large kettle that all that got cooked down in.
So for listeners who want to know more about your diet, obviously your cookbook, I mean, you mentioned in your book very in depth, but also you have your cookbook that walks
Yeah.
patients through, okay, so if we're going to eat this many greens, right, what recipes, how can we make this taste good? Yeah.
You want it to be delicious. You want it to be
Yep.
easy. You want your and when my hospital that I worked at, the Iowa City Veteran Affairs Medical Center, people had seen me for 4 years in a reclining wheelchair, clearly looking worse every year. And then suddenly I'm up walking around. And the other thing that was remarkable, it changes how I interact with my patients.
Yeah.
So I am remarkably effective at getting these veterans to decide they're going to fix their diet. And as we got them fired up with eating food and getting a step counter and moving, and we are seeing in my veterans reversal of type 2 diabetes, obesity,
Mm.
and systemic autoimmune diseases. I got pulled out of my primary care clinic. I got pulled out of the traumatic brain injury clinic to create a new clinic, which we called the Therapeutic Lifestyle Clinic. And for that, I would go around to the specialty medicine and to the pain clinic and to primary care. And my pitch was, give me your most difficult patients that have a lot of pain that you just can't seem to help. And they need to know I'm not using drugs, but let's
Yeah.
see what we can do.
Yeah.
And, so we got a few people at first, and they were remarkably better. Then we started getting quite a few more. And I kept having to redesign the way I approached this clinic. So I didn't want people to have to wait forever to get in to see us. So we went from small group to large group to larger group to classes. And then I ended up having to make a decision. Do I stay in the VA? Do I take this message to the greater world? So I retired from the VA. I continued to work at the university so I could keep my research going. And I expanded my company to teach more clinicians and to teach the public.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot you can do.
Larger reach, much larger reach.
Yeah,
Let me
whole
go
lot you can
back
do.
to, you kind of already answered this, but I wanted to ask kind of how your colleagues responded to your recovery. And you kind of mentioned, obviously, what you mentioned, you kind of stunned them because of this reversal of something that wasn't supposed to be reversible, right?
Yeah.
But were they
yeah.
open? I mean, really, truly, were
Well,
they open?
So people are thrilled to see me walking around, like, oh my God, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
But it was also super interesting. The Iowa City MS support group wanted me to speak. I got interviewed by their clinical advisory board. I said, no, I'll tell them and they thought my message was dangerous because people might refuse disease-modifying treatments if they hold
Sure.
my
I
story.
was like, because people might eat vegetables? No, because people might not want the drugs. Okay.
Right.
But you weren't saying not take the drugs. You were
no,
saying,
I never
let's
said not take the
let's
drugs.
also, yes,
I
change
said,
lifestyle. Yeah.
I'm not a neurologist, but adopt diet and lifestyle as part of whatever you're doing. But that message was dangerous. I got banned as a speaker. Then a couple weeks later, my chief of staff calls me in to say, Terry, we're getting complaints about you. And plus I hear you're a banned speaker. What the hell are you doing? And unfortunately, I had sort of known this might be coming. So I had brought with me a handful of scientific papers to sort of explain why I was doing what I was doing. And his response is, well, you got to stop. You have to follow the standard of care. Now, mind you, I'm sort of sober at work. I don't smile a lot, really. I don't know why that is, but I don't. And so
you're smiling now, but yeah, I can see you just be more serious.
Very serious. So I sit back and say, well, of course, John, you sent out an email to all the faculty that we have to follow the standard of care, that we cannot use the latest research to guide our recommendations. Of course, I'll follow that. And I sit back and I smile. And I wait. And of course, I don't know how long this was. It felt like
2 hours,
but it was probably just a few seconds or maybe a few minutes. And then John finally says, okay, Terry, you got me. But if anyone gets hurt, you're going through peer review. And I go, of course, John. If anyone ever gets hurt, we all go through peer review. Of course I should go through peer review. And, and then, but I'm very, very grateful because you also said, but you have to learn how to do what you were doing without upsetting your colleagues. So I'm going to send you to the University of Iowa Complementary Alternative Medicine Clinic with Dr. Nicole Knisley, because you have to learn how to talk about this in the public. You have to learn how to talk about this in the medical record, because what you're doing right now, you're going to get into trouble in an anonymous complaint to the medical board. You'll get audited and you'll flunk. And we will not defend you. You'll lose your license. So he scared the Jesus out of me.
Yeah.
So I went to the Complementary Alternative Medicine Clinic, and that was incredibly helpful because I learned to be much more precise in that I am supporting how your cells do the chemistry of life, and then we'll have to watch and see what happens so that you don't become over medicated if in fact it turns out your cells are working better, your blood pressure is improving, your blood sugar is improving. We have to just watch and adjust your medications.
Sure.
And this is an alternative to standard FDA approved treatments. So then I started documenting that in the medical record. People were much more comfortable,
Mhm.
that I made it very clear I'm not treating disease. I'm working on creating a healthier environment. And I'm very careful about having this disclaimer now when I speak publicly. And so that basically I learned how to play better in the medical sandbox. And so that helped my colleagues feel more comfortable. And then
Sure.
John, he ended up being a tremendous champion for me. People would come to complain. Then his response was, look, she's just telling us that we should do what we should all be doing, eating our vegetables and exercising. You got a problem with that? So he became a big champion. My chief of medicine at the university was a huge champion. And they ended up, my chief of medicine, Paul Rothman, directed me to do a clinical trial, our first one. He got me some more mentors because that was not the type of research that I had done or had been trained to do. So, and John Cowdery at the VA gave me 3 days a week, covered time to do the research, which is extraordinary, really. So it was, we had some bumps along the way, but in the end, both the VA and the university were extraordinarily supportive.
That's wonderful.
And
Yeah.
when we did our IRB application, the first one was turned down. It was denied, and I thought, okay, maybe this is not going to happen. But the chief of the Institutional Review Board called me up and said, Terry, we turned you down. You need to rewrite the application, and we want you to do your protocol. You have to study what you did precisely. And so that is part of why all of my clinical trials I was directed to very precisely as I could emulate what I had done.
Sure.
I have since learned that the other reason all this happened was the chief of medicine, who had watched my recovery, had become the dean of the College of Medicine. And he, behind the scenes, had said, this study really needs to happen. We'll get her the resources on her team to address all of the concerns that the IRB has. So ultimately, we're able to do that for a study with extraordinary results, which then led to some additional gifts to continue doing our clinical trials.
Wonderful. Yeah, that was going to be my next question is tell us about your clinical trial. So maybe can you expand on because there was just the first trial, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? And then, which I know
Yeah.
you mentioned on the last show, but then also mention kind of what's been new since the last podcast, kind of the current clinical trials as well.
Yeah. So our first trial, super interesting. What we did was we started with other people with progressive MS. So they're no longer relapse remitting. They're in the phase where you just get the steady decline, 10 to 15% in each domain every year. And the intervention was the same supplement list that I was taking, the electrostimulation using the same device I was using. We focused on exercising for walking, and we taught them a mantra-based meditation. And we used that diet, no grain, no legumes, no dairy, no eggs, and 9 cups of vegetables.
Yep. Greens, colors, sulfur. Yeah, sure.
And protein. And we insisted people eat meat. So you had to be willing to eat meat.
Sure.
And we saw them every 3 months. We measured self-reports of mood, self-reports of quality of life, and then and self-reports of fatigue. Then we also measured walking 25 feet, a 9-hole pegboard, hand function, and some working memory. We did not have MRIs in that first group because, well, that's expensive.
Yeah,
it's expensive. So we're able to show that the first thing, and the big question was, could people do this? It's because it's very complicated. You got people who are severely fatigued, who are in the disability between cane and walkers. So I get really disabled folks. So could they actually do this complicated regimen? Did we hurt them? So what were the adverse effects? And then what was the effect size of all of these interventions? Well, the biggest, we had one person have to drop out at 6 months because of continued cognitive decline. And that's not surprising because cognitive decline is a big factor for people with progressive MS.
Sure.
The other adverse event, people lost weight. If you're overweight or obese, you lost weight. And you got back to the weight you were at in your early 20s. And I had to do these safety reports because people lost so much weight so
and
rapidly.
It was an adverse event.
That every 3 months I had to file a report back to my safety committee and to the IRB, what was happening with people's weights. We were notifying their primary care doc. And that was just an interesting observation.
Sure.
The fatigue, the drop in fatigue was really quite remarkable. There's a 7-point scale, and we dropped 2.38 points. Now, the clinically meaningful difference is 0.45. So you could say that's a
statistically
very
significant, sure.
Very large, clinically significant, statistically significant reduction in fatigue. The improvement in quality of life was also quite remarkable for energy and general health. That improved by 15 and 17 points. And the clinically significant change there is 5 points.
Awesome.
The walking change.
Yeah.
Now you anticipate people will have a 10 to 15% worsening of their walking each year. As a group, we held them perfectly flat, perfectly level. So that's extraordinary. Half of our people had improvement in walking.
I remember seeing those videos. These are the videos, right?
Yep, these are the videos. We had one lady who's jogging at 6 months. And yes, some of our folks continue to decline. The other thing that was super interesting, so we had some people who were remarkably improving, but something very challenging happens in their life, a divorce.
Sure.
And she stops doing the intervention. And so instead of improving, now she's markedly worse.
Yeah.
And we have another gentleman who was improving, he and his wife, and she had also had some big health improvements. But again, they had an event that led them to abandon the intervention, and his gait, severely deteriorated then. So super interesting that progressive MS remarkably improved. Then we did a small randomized controlled study. Again, we started with progressive MS. We couldn't quite get enough progressive MS, so we took relapsed remitting MS who needed a cane. In that group, it's controlled. So we have folks who did not get the intervention, folks who did a paleo diet, folks who did a keto diet. And what we're able to show is fatigue reduces, quality of life improves. And there's something called a measured disability, which looks at a combination of walking, hand, and short-term recall. We're able to show that the intervention had reduced, it was stable in terms of the measured disability. The control arm had that 15% worsening every year. So super interesting.
Yeah.
Then the next study, big study that we did, again, a super interesting study, looks at a 12-week observation period, a 24-week intervention with the low-fat swank diet, which is the diet that I had used for many years, versus the Wahls elimination diet, which is a paleo-based elimination diet. And we looked at measured disability, and we compared the control to the intervention, and we saw that walking, 20-foot walking did not improve, but hand function improved and working memory improves. So the combined measure, that's called MS functional composite, improved at 12 weeks for the Swank group, had not yet improved for the Wahls group, but at 24 weeks, both Swank and Wahls significantly improves. And Wahls is more improved than Swank, but statistically, there's not a big enough difference to say it's statistically significant. What is remarkable, if you think about this, we just changed their diet. We told them to not add a new exercise program, but we see measurable improvements in motor function, measurable improvements in thinking ability.
Mm-hmm.
If you combined a better diet and a physical training program, like, oh my goodness, what could you do?
And you don't have to have progressive, MS to do this. This is
Oh,
not
yeah.
just for,
It,
yeah,
you know,
to be
and-
clear. Yeah.
And all of us, after the age of 40, sort of shocking and somewhat disappointing, we aging accelerates. And so brain volume loss begins to happen, cognitive decline begins to happen, motor decline begins to happen. But we could stop all that, or greatly slow it, realistically, is
Sure.
better diet, physical training, targeted supplements, instead of declining being at age 40, you keep everything going great, and then
Well, you reversed
maybe at
that
120,
decline. Yeah.
maybe at 120, things begin to decline.
Can we go back? I do want to hear about your current trial too, but you have mentioned supplements, and I know there's no supplement in the world that's going to replace lifestyle diet changes. To be very clear on that, I always tell
Yes.
patients that no pill, potion, or powder that's going to replace the diet change. And I want to comment on the egg situation too, because we've tested thousands of patients with food sensitivities, and I honestly think egg is the top most common that we see on paper, which I don't think people should be eating gluten. Gluten's not good for anyone, and dairy is very inflammatory, but just interesting insight from me is that I see eggs show up all the time on food sensitivity testing. So that's just when you had mentioned that eggs were, for
Eggs
you,
are
kryptonite, essentially, right?
Yeah, they're kryptonite for me.
Yeah.
And they're delicious. I loved eggs. I love making huevos rancheros, sauteing eggs in hot salsa, having some black beans on the side. Like, oh my God, that was just such a delicious meal for me. But
your body just tasted good, but your body didn't like it. It was inflammatory for you.
It's a problem.
But what were the targeted supplements? And you don't have to list every single one, but what are kind of the top, which you feel are most important, back to even fueling your mitochondria, which you kind of opened the show mentioning is so important to you?
So I want to be sure you have plenty of vitamin D. So a vitamin D supplement plus sunshine and get a tan. If you're taking vitamin D, I want you to also take vitamin K2, so that the K2 will help your mitochondria, will help your oligodendrocytes, help you make more myelin, and help with the getting calcium into your bones instead of your blood vessels. So if you take vitamin D, you got to be sure you're taking vitamin K.
Usher that calcium into the bone matrix, into the right place, not the wrong places, like making kidney stones and calcifying your arteries and all that. Yes.
It is just so important. And then I'd like to have people know their homocysteine. And if the homocysteine is elevated, then that's a clue that your B vitamin pathways are abnormal. Now, I've done genetic testing for myself, and I know that I have a bunch of abnormalities in my B12 pathways, so I need more B12 than most folks. And if your homocysteine is elevated and you have normal folate B12 levels, then you probably need the activated forms of the variety of B vitamins. So we've got D and
Bees.
And bees.
Yep.
And then I want to be sure you have plenty of omega-3s. And so the research would say between 1 and 4 grams of fish oil, and depending on the study, somewhere in that range is optimal. And you could check your fatty acid ratios to know that you're in the optimal ratio of 4 to 1
Yep.
omega-6 to omega-3. I think those are the most
Top.
basic.
Sure.
Then you might get into thinking about your microbiome. Do you have yeast overgrowth? Do you have the commensals? And so you can think about probiotics and something for yeast suppression. There's an abundance of research that N-acetylcysteine is very helpful. If you have enough sulfur in your diet, your body will be better equipped to make the sulfur-based amino acids that you need to run the chemistry of life. Most people, the standard Americans, don't have enough sulfur in their diet, so N-acetylcysteine will be very helpful. I think 500 milligrams to a gram of NAC or N-acetylcysteine is often very helpful.
Sure. Wonderful. Great. Good summary there. Okay, let's go back to, thank you for, shedding light on the past clinical trials and kind of the progression of those. So what about your current clinical trial? So what are you doing now? What's the latest and greatest in your life?
It is so exciting. We're doing what will probably be the largest, longest diet based MS study that's been conducted.
Very
And we
cool.
look at
Yeah.
clinicaltrials.gov. I don't see any other studies that are this long. It's a 2-year intervention of comparing a keto diet to a paleo diet to usual diet. People have to have relapse remitting multiple sclerosis.
Yep.
They need to agree to not get pregnant for 2 years. So we'll want them to use contraception.
Sure.
And you can't have oxalate kidney stones, and you can't have an active eating disorder.
Sure.
So those are the big contraindications.
And is that started? Like when did that?
It started. We've enrolled, I think, 130 people that have been randomized. We may be up to 132 by now. And we're trying to get up to 156. So I am hopeful that
Your kids still enrolling.
We're still enrolling.
Okay, sure.
And so all of your listeners, please go to terrywahls.com/MS study. Tell your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues who have multiple sclerosis. We would like to get them enrolled. And even if they're not eligible, I want them to screen because they have a chance to say that they'd like to be part of our database, because we do other studies that people could hear about that are survey based.
Sure.
So,
and I didn't hear on. Sorry, finish. Yeah, finish your website.
Yeah, terrywahls.com/MS study.
And so this specific study you may have mentioned, but I didn't follow. I was taking a note here. Is for any type of MS, or is this just relapsing remitting or secondary progressive? Or
relapsing remitting. But if your listeners have progressive MS, please complete screen so you can add your name to our patient database.
Sure.
Because we do survey-based studies also, and they'd be eligible for those.
Wonderful. Okay. I'm going to go off on a tangent here just for a second. I know you can only, work so hard and do so much in one day, but have you looked into toxins and infections? I know the blunt of your research is on diet, right? But have you looked into those in these cases, or even thought about, like mycotoxins, heavy metals, non-metal chemicals? I mean, as having a functional medicine practice for autoimmune diseases, I'm screening patients for those, for those who can afford it and who are willing to do additional testing. I mean, obviously those can impact the nervous system, the immune system. That's a whole nother bucket, but I just want to go there for a second and ask. Yeah.
Clinically, yes. For a research trial, no, we aren't investigating that. But clinically, yes. And I'll tell your listeners, when it's at the VA, and we're seeing the sick people that my conventional colleagues are like, okay, they can't do anything more. I assume that they're toxic. And if you're in the VA system, having gone through the rigors of VAs and their exposures, I think that was certainly very accurate. Assume that they're all toxic. We put them on a detox protocol.
Yep.
We also assumed that they had a lot of cortisol dysregulation because of the severe stress and the trauma related to their military experience. So we'd put them on a fairly intensive, I'd say, stress rehabilitation process. And depending on their capabilities, would have them on a variety of exercise programs. Now keep in mind, some people are severely disabled, and so their high intensity exercise might be chair jumping jacks. And then we have some people who are still physically fit, and their high intensity program actually is a HIIT program, doing sprints. So we'd be very careful to adapt the exercise intensity so that they could do high intensity exercise that was appropriate for their level of disability.
Well, now I want to ask, so what is appropriate for you? What are you doing now? Obviously, riding your bike was a huge milestone for you. I mean,
So riding my bike, that's super interesting. It's very common for people with MS to develop scoliosis. I have arthritis in my back, and I developed spinal stenosis, which led to progressively severe back pain and made it so that I could only stand for about 10 minutes. I had to resort to sitting again to give my lectures. Very frustrating, but that was life.
Sure.
And I could walk less and less far because of my intense back pain. And I'd gotten down to I could only walk half a mile because of the back pain. I'd started doing pulsed electromagnetic fields to my back, and I'd say I'm also doing it to my brain. And I started that a year ago. What is remarkable, Stephanie, is I can now give my lectures, 90-minute lectures, not a problem. I can now hike for hours. As a matter of fact, last spring I went to the Rocky Mountain National Park, and I was able to hike 3 hours up to 12,000 feet to the Ute trailhead. And when I agreed to go to that park with my family, I wasn't sure I could do anything, and I was going to send them and not go. I was just going to go to my scientific conference. I said, no, Mom, just come along. However far you can walk or hike will be fine. And so we were all stunned, like 3 hours at basically 3 hours up.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, I am, it's stunning how much better my back pain is, how much more resilient I am. I am jogging again slowly, and I had jogged a couple miles, and I stumbled, broke my wrist. That was pretty annoying.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was like, okay. And then my neurologist said, Terry, it's good that you're running, but you don't have good judgment as to when to stop. So would you think about running on your treadmill instead? So that's what I've been doing. I'll hike, I'll do Nordic walking outside, but I don't want to risk stumbling again. So when I'm jogging, I'm jogging on my treadmill.
So how many years ago was it that you were in a wheelchair? And can you, I mean, even just thinking back, sharing that story, I know you shared your story thousands of times, but putting yourself back in that moment when you're in the wheelchair is like, did you ever think you were going to get to this point where you're hiking with your family?
So I'm in the wheelchair. You
didn't give up. I mean, clearly you didn't give up.
And what is remarkable is that it was my two children who were watching me, because everyone needs. What I want you to understand is how grim my future was. I was beginning to have. I was beginning to have brain fog. Yeah. My trigeminal neuralgia would turn on. I'd have to go to the pain clinic, get injections. I'd be taking IV Cytomedrol. It would take 5 days of Cytomedrol to turn it off. And I had changed my medical durable power of attorney and my living will to say that if I quit swallowing, there's no IV fluids, no feeding tube, because when it would turn on and it would ramp up to really severe in a couple hours, moving my tongue would trigger the electrical face pain. So I can't swallow. I choose to not swallow because it causes so much pain. So I'm just drooling. And if I try to talk, it would come out like this, because I would move my tongue. I'd get the jolt of pain,
You're
And
in
so
misery. You're in misery. Yeah.
I'd be unable
Yeah.
to communicate.
Yeah.
So the agreement was I had all of these everything documented at the university. Jack had it, that if I got to that point and we couldn't turn it off, if the Cytomedrol was not turning it off, if the pain clinic injection was not turning it off, and I'm no longer communicating, it was very clear that you would not accelerate to IV fluids, you would not accelerate to tube feeding.
Sure.
And so I took a lot of comfort, like, okay, it would eventually stop. And
you were at that point where you had accepted that,
it's like,
but
okay,
you hadn't, but you hadn't given up.
I hadn't given up. It's like, okay, but this is what will happen. And my kids were watching me. So I knew that I had to keep doing everything that I could to try and slow my decline, because recovery was not possible. I was going to slow my decline. But that isn't what happened. In fact,
look at you now.
I got better. I got remarkably better.
How many years ago? I mean, approximately. Obviously, you've been working at this for a long time, but like, how long has it been now? Yeah.
I really started experimenting myself in 2004.
Okay.
In 2007 was when I really had the Wahls protocol, and
Sure.
2008, I'm like, I'm remarkably better. It wasn't when I got on my bike and I biked for the first time. That's when I was like, oh my God, I am getting better. That the current understanding of progressive MS is wrong. And so now this is my message to all of your listeners.
Yes.
Whatever your disease state is, the current understanding is incomplete. Nobody fully understands what happens when you create a better environment for your cells through better nutrition, better self-care, exercise, meditation, better sleep, and your cells can do the chemistry of life more correctly. At the very least, your progressive disease will slow down and stabilize. And what you more likely will experience is your cell functions are working better. You'll have less pain, better blood pressure, better blood sugar, more energy, more stable moods, greater fertility.
Brain fog.
Greater fertility.
Yeah.
And if you're on medication, you'll have to watch that medication closely, because you'll need less and less and less and fewer prescriptions. Now, I still take my gabapentin. I've tried multiple times to get off. I can't get off. My face pain will come back. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not on disease modifying drugs.
So be it, you're alive and you're hiking. Yeah, exactly.
So you could have a great life. Anyone, even if you have a severe progressive illness, do your self-cares and be confident that you'll have a great life. I don't quite know what that great life is going to be for you, but it's there.
Thank you. It was beautiful. Before we wrap up the show, I do want to go back to kind of some of the self-care and the practices that you have, because you have an awesome Instagram. You're always posting, recipes, just different habits.
Yeah.
And I've known you for years, so I know you're a bit of a biohacker and you like to experiment on yourself too. So tell us some of the practices, and I can certainly share some of what I've seen on Instagram too, but you practice what you preach, like literally every day. So can you share some things that you're doing on a daily basis to maintain the health that you've rebuilt?
So first thing to tell everyone is I retired from the VA, so I do have more time. That makes my life so is just wonderful. It's like, okay, I can do more self-care, and maybe that's why I can now hike and jog again. So this morning I get up and I meditate. I meditate to a biohacking device that uses tones into my ears, lights into my ears and eyes, and that supports a deeper meditation. So that's the first thing I do. Then the next thing I do, and today I did strength training with blood flow restriction bands and a vibration plate. So by combining all that is one very intense strength training routine. Then I went into my sauna for near infrared light, and I read about Caitlin Clark, and I have I have so much fun following Caitlin Clark. So that was fun. Then I came out, I took a cold shower, and then I got dressed to hang out with you. And so my self-care routine now, I'd say typically 2 to 3 hours a day, I'm doing some aspect of self-care. And later today, I'll be doing my pulsed electromagnetic field generator to my brain and to my back.
Sure.
I get a half hour of that every day. And my dog, who has a systemic autoimmune disease, I give him a half an hour every day, and he's really perking up and doing much, much better.
Is he on your diet? Are you feeding him like real food?
Well, he's getting real food. He's
Good.
getting bison and
Okay.
chicken, raw bison and raw chicken.
Yeah, lucky dog. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he's just really perked right up.
That's great.
9 months ago, we thought he was about to die. And then I said, okay, we're going to do the functional medicine thing for him. And he's really perked up. So he's
That's
doing
great.
very well. And I tend to eat once a day. And
Yeah.
so this evening, we'll have a bison chili kind of meal that I've put together. And I'll probably have some of my leftovers, which was sauteed cabbage as well. And then I'll do another when I go to sleep tonight. This is a lovely tradition. I have a meditative practice where I go through my life, and I picked various phases of my life where I'm thanking people or places
Yeah.
or the animals in my life.
Sure.
So it's a gratitude practice by
Sure.
which I fall asleep. And so
That's a great way to fall asleep. Yes. Or
it's a
to
great way
start
to
your
fall
day.
asleep.
Both. Yeah.
It's a great way to fall asleep. It's a great way to set up your mind to reflect on the positive things in life.
Your sleep's probably better when you do that too. Yeah.
It's way better.
Yeah.
And sleep has always been difficult for me because I've always been sort of ambitious, and I thought it was fine if you just have 4 hours of sleep, easily activated, because there's a lot I wanted to do.
No.
And fortunately, eventually I realized, that's pretty terrible. I have to take better care of my sleep. And so if I wake up during the night, my practice now is to meditate and recycle the gratitude meditations.
Thank you for sharing that routine. Do you have a favorite recipe? Obviously, there's lots of recipes in your cookbook, lots. But is there a repeat recipe in your household that like every week you're doing, whether it's,
Well,
I mean, even a dessert, something that you love?
liver and onions. Properly prepared, you saute your onions, take them out, and then put the liver in. You want the liver to be medium rare. So lamb liver is really quite delicious. Chicken liver, we bake our chicken livers. That is delicious. My family knows that that's one of our favorite meals.
Sure. And liver's going to be loaded with those B vitamins you were mentioning
It
earlier
is
too.
just
Yeah.
so good for us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. Tell us where listeners can find you again, share your website, and tell us about your upcoming summit this summer.
Okay, so terrywahls.com for the website. If you add /email, you can sign up for emails. You'll get notices about all the great stuff that we're having. Add MS study to sign up and screen for our clinical trial, or add diet to get a one-page handout for the Wahls diet, which will get you started. Go to Instagram, Dr. Terry Wahls, Dr. Terry Wahls. Then you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Threads using just Terry Wahls.
Okay.
And then this summer, we'll have a MS and Neuroimmune Summit. So I'm in the process of doing a bunch of interviews right now of scientists, clinicians, entrepreneurs about the things that we can be doing to better improve our quality of life for people with multiple sclerosis and people with a systemic autoimmune disease that have a neurologic or psychiatric symptoms. And really, in most systemic autoimmune diseases, if you have fatigue, irritability, anxiety, that is what we call neuroimmune symptoms.
Sure. Wonderful. I'm excited to hear more about your summit. Okay, as we conclude the show, tell us your top longevity tip.
have gratitude in your life. I'm sure you've heard about the diet, the exercise. These are important things. A simple thing that you can do that doesn't cost money, but only costs your time, is that gratitude practice that I described. You can visualize a person in your life. I love visualizing my mom cuddling me as an infant, and my dad, cuddling me as an infant. And I thank them because
Yeah,
there's plenty of times when I was a ungrateful child, and was not easy to deal with.
me too.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm just so grateful for the love that my parents showed me, and grateful for the opportunities that we had growing up on the farm. And grateful that as an adult, when I ran into some difficult times, my parents still came back and did the adult emotional cuddling that parents do when they have adult children.
Wonderful, unique answer. That was a beautiful longevity tip. Thank you again, Dr. Wahls, for coming on the show and sharing again your story and just how involved you are with clinical trials to get your research out there truly to those who have these neurodegenerative conditions so they can get their lives back like you have. Again, you changed the trajectory of your life. You could be, quite frankly, not here anymore, right? And
Oh,
you're,
absolutely.
and not to be depressing, but wow, you really flipped the script on that. And now you are, sharing your work with the masses. So thank you for providing hope. That certainly is your mission. Thank you for being an inspiration. Thanks for coming on the show again. This is great.
Thank you.